Welcome to Georgia, 1856, a place where the air tastes of cane smoke and the ground remembers the footsteps of the enslaved. Welcome to the night Gullah-Geechee parish stopped breathing when a woman sang to iron chains and the metal itself began to hum. Before we begin, leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from and the exact moment you hear the first note of her song. Share your experience, your chills, your questions. Because tonight, we open a story that never fully ended. The Gullah-Geechee Parish Record Entry 214 still exists in fragile ink curling at the edges. Celestine, female. Age uncertain, colored. Offense incitement sorcery, subversion of order. Sentence death by fire commuted to hanging. The ink is brown now. The parchment warped by time. But the clerk's script, faint as a whisper, still bleeds through. No one reading it could know what happened inside the cellar that night, when Mamá Celestine lifted her voice. And the chains responded. They said the iron glowed red, though no flame touched it. They said the floor trembled beneath her. They said the candle she held burned blue-white, steady as eyes that watched through her. Tonight we reopen the cellar, unroll the records, listen for what was left. If this is legend, why does the iron hum when it rains? Georgia, 1856. The Gullah-Geechee River, winding dark through cane fields. Cabins baking in the sun, smelling of sweat smoke and salt. And somewhere beneath the roots, a sound waited the hum of iron that remembered her song. The local paper noted a single line. A colored woman was executed last night for witchcraft and insurrection. No name, no age, only those two words interchangeable in fear. The blacksmith who forged the shackles found his tools rusted overnight. The wood bent inward, the iron hummed. The cellar was locked and abandoned. A century later, the floor caved, the air thick with rot. The shackles still hung coated in red dust like dried blood. Scientists called it oxidation. Locals called it the curse that never broke. An ethnographer in 1933 recorded an old Gullah woman humming a song for the one who sang to the chains. The wax cylinder crackles. One line repeats, she sang, and the iron wept. Allen noted Celestine in the margin, no context. He died in a fire a year later, all archives gone except that cylinder. Misfiled, surviving, humming still. Georgia, 1856. The summer sun hangs heavy over the cane fields along the Gullah-Geechee River, thick with heat and the scent of burning stalks, the air carrying a weight that presses against the skin, the lungs, the memory of every step taken here before. Along the riverbank, the cabins rise like low, tired spirits. Timber sun-bleached roofs, patched with scraps, each plank soaked with sweat salt and the faint tang of smoke from last night's fire. The enslaved men and women move silently between the rows, their bodies bending under the labor that has long become a rhythm of endurance and quiet resistance. Footsteps echo in the dirt yards, dogs bark in the distance, and the occasional whistle of the overseer cuts through the haze. It is here in this sweltering heat and oppressive order that Mamá Celestine lives, the woman who will be remembered in whispers, in fear, in awe. She dwells on the edge of the plantation in a cabin half hidden by overgrown cane and moss-draped trees, a place where the scent of herbs and charred wood clings to every surface. The locals, both enslaved and free, speak of her in low tones, calling her a healer, a witch, a priestess. Some tell of her singing to the wind, of calling spirits in the dead of night, of walking the riverbanks with charms and ritual. Her eyes glowing in the dark, as though she can see through the veil that separates the living from the departed. The plantation itself is a world apart, the master's house looming white and proud. Its windows reflecting the sun, a sharp contrast to the darkened quarters behind the air thick with whispered prayers and secret meetings. Fact, the overseer's records list Celestine as an agitator, a woman whose knowledge of roots, herbs, and spirits might disturb the order they enforce. Folklore. The enslaved speak of her voice carrying across the fields bending metal, causing iron shackles to twist and hum, as if remembering every footfall of those who wore them. Evening falls, the sun slipping behind the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and golds. The air cools slightly, bringing with it the scent of wet earth and river mud. A hush settles over the cabins as the enslaved finish their labor, the sounds of labor fading into the whispers of the night. Somewhere across the plantation, a lone drumbeat begins soft, tentative, almost imperceptible. It echoes from the woods, from the riverbanks, a rhythm that carries with it the memory of ceremonies past. The elders whisper, "This is the heartbeat of the land, the pulse that Celestine can hear, that she can call upon." The river moves like a black ribbon through this world, carrying not just water but stories, rumors, dreams, and fears. Fact parish maps indicate the proximity of the cabins to the river, the distance between overseer housing and enslaved quarters. Folklore, some claim the river can carry voices from the past, that if you listen closely at night, you can hear the chants of those who never escaped their songs, folded into the wind, calling out to anyone who dares to remember. Night descends fully, and the plantation transforms. The firelight from the master's house flickers against the river, casting shadows that dance across the fields. Celestine emerges from her cabin barefoot, her dress catching the last of the day's light, carrying a bundle of herbs and a small candle. Her movements are deliberate, slow, measured, each step an invocation, a whisper to the unseen. Fact plantation journals note sightings of Celestine moving in the evening hours with strange objects, mumbling incantations, a phrase that drew disdain and fear from the overseers. Folklore among the enslaved, these movements are sacred, a protection, a promise she sings for them. She sings against them, and sometimes they say the chains themselves answer. The fields are quiet now. A faint mist begins to rise, curling over the cane-hiding shapes, softening edges. The sounds of night creatures, crickets, frogs, distant owls fill the air, mingling with the occasional sigh of wind through the trees. Celestine kneels at the riverbank, setting candles along the water's edge, each flame small, steady, reaching upward like silent sentinels. Her voice rises soft at first, almost a whisper, then stronger, carrying across the river, through the cane, through the hearts of those who hear. Fact, there are no official records of what she sang. Folklore, those who claim to have heard, say it could bend iron call spirits and lift the spirits of the enslaved in ways words cannot convey. Behind her, the cabins are darkened. Smoke drifts from chimneys, lanterns sway. A dog barks in the distance, but all else is silent, as if holding its breath. The night is thick, alive, and heavy with possibility. This is the stage, the scene, the theater where history and legend will intertwine. Fact, historical accounts show increased incidents of escaped slaves in plantations near Gullah-Geechee during this period. Folklore, some attribute these escapes to the power of Celestine's voice and her rituals whispered to have reached even those bound in chains miles away. The moon rises above the horizon, silver and pale, reflecting off the river's surface, casting ghostly shapes across the land. Celestine moves among them, her hands tracing shapes in the air, dropping herbs into the water, murmuring invocations known only to her. Fact, no overseer dared approach her at night. Journals note their fear of unnatural occurrences and sounds near her cabin. Folklore, the enslaved speak of the iron itself, singing in response, vibrating faintly under her touch, a sound that would haunt them forever. By the time the first birds call, the land is still. Dew collects on the cane, the river glints in morning light, and the traces of ritual remain: extinguished candles, herbs scattered, and a lingering sense of power, real, felt unrecorded by law, but impossible to ignore. Fact, the plantation returned to routine. No record of punishment was issued for any supernatural claims. Folklore, the song she sang that night, would survive in whispers, in dream narratives, in the hearts of those who carried her story, keeping it alive across decades. This is the Georgia of 1856, a land steeped in toil, fear, ritual, and hope, where the ordinary becomes extraordinary, where chains can hum, where a single voice can leave an imprint that time cannot erase. Fact and folklore interweave, forming the fabric of memory, a tapestry that reaches across centuries. Here we set the stage, we place the players, and we prepare for the events that will follow, events that will define Celestine's story, and the echoes of her song that refuse to die. The Gullah-Geechee parish records are sparse, formal, and chilling. They tell of Celestine in bureaucratic terms, a colored female age, uncertain, suspected of sorcery and inciting unrest. Yet in those same pages, margins scrawled by clerks hint at something else, something intangible, notes like the iron sang beneath her touch. Fact, official court records document her trial. The proceedings, the sentence commuted from fire to hanging. Names, dates, charges, yet nothing captures the sound, the tremor, the vibration of chains responding to her presence. The local overseers wrote in journals of unease, inexplicable rust, on shackles, warped wood shadows that lingered longer than the light. Fact, contemporary letters note the metal of the irons vibrated under unknown force, causing instruments to fall from tables. A dry bureaucratic phrase that betrays the fear they felt. Folklore. The enslaved whispered differently. They spoke of a song, a chant, a low hum that wrapped around the ribcage, that moved through the body, lifting despair into a trembling hope. Mothers told children at night that if the chains sang, it meant Celestine had passed near. They called her the one who spoke to iron. Among plantation workers, rumors persisted. She could summon wind to shift gates, call the river to rise and fall, and speak with the spirits of the dead. Fact, no court records acknowledge such powers, no witness testimony admits belief. Folklore. The stories thrived in hushed tones and fleeting glimpses of movement in the cane, in the sense that something unseen watched over the enslaved, guided by her hand, her voice, her song. The overseer's journals, however, reveal moments of dread, late nights, where the fields shook subtly. The cane bending without wind, the distant sound of chains clinking when no one approached. Fact, these observations were noted repeatedly between May and July 1856. But always dismissed as imagination, superstition, paranoia. Folklore, the enslaved knew better. They had seen the shimmer of her ritual candlelight in the mist, heard her humming melodies that carried across the river. Melodies older than the plantation itself, songs taught to her by elders, songs said to bend metal, to shift locks, to open paths for freedom. In newspapers, a single line appears after her execution. A colored woman executed for witchcraft. Fact, no context, no description. Folklore, in secret, the enslaved added their own annotations to the record, marking the date as the night the chains remembered. A voice that refused to be silenced, a voice that would echo in the canebrake long after her body was gone. The Freedmen's Bureau would later collect oral accounts of escaped enslaved people. Fact, several mention a woman in Georgia whose interventions, sometimes visible, sometimes unseen, facilitated disappearances and defiance of the master's law. Folklore. These disappearances became stories whispered around fires, the children taught to recognize the hum of iron as a sign, the subtle vibration in floorboards as a signal of her presence, and the whispering wind through mossy trees as guidance for those seeking safety. Her rituals were meticulous. A candle placed at each corner of the room. Herbs crushed under the heel. Whispers into the grain of the wood. Fact accounts describe her movements in the cabin as careful, deliberate. Each step calculated. Yet the clerk's dry notes do not convey the tension, the presence, the palpable fear and awe. Folklore. Her voice was the instrument, her breath, the wind, her hands weaving spells in air and earth, and when she sang, it was said that iron chains lifted from their moorings, that doors unlocked, that those held captive could taste freedom in dreams. Somehow the line between reality and myth blurred. Fact historians find accounts of rusted chains, warped locks, and missing tools that correlate with nights she was seen performing rites. Folklore. The stories paint her as a spectral figure walking through the plantation after dark, humming to metal, speaking in tones only the enslaved could understand, invisible to those who would punish her, yet overwhelmingly present to those in need. The legends persist in WPA narratives decades later. Elderly Gullah women recounting tales to researchers, speaking of the one who sang to iron. Fact, these interviews recorded in the 1930s contain inconsistencies, but patterns emerge: consistent references to melody, ritual, empowerment, and escape. Folklore. One woman describes seeing the chains rise and tremble as Celestine passed, a detail not corroborated by physical evidence, yet repeated across interviews, suggesting the memory itself carried power. The plantation landscape itself seems to testify. Fact, the layout, cabin placement, river proximity, grove of trees, all match reports of ritual activity. Folklore elders claim she used the environment to amplify her power, singing along the river, dropping herbs where shadows pooled, calling spirits from the moss-draped oaks, all while the overseers slept or looked the other way, unnerved by inexplicable events. No single document captures her fully. Fact, all court and overseer records are fragmented, bureaucratic, and partial. Folklore, every story, every whisper, every song passed down, is a thread weaving together a tapestry of fear, respect, and reverence. The enslaved knew she was more than human, more than healer, more than a woman. She was the voice of resistance incarnate. And so the tale of Mamá Celestine exists in two forms: cold, measured, bureaucratic, written in ink on brittle parchment, and alive, vibrating, sung, whispered, felt, in the iron itself, in the breath of the river, in the trembling hands of those who would remember. Fact and folklore dancing together, inseparable, each enhancing the weight of the other, each refusing to be diminished. The night approaches once more, the air thick with possibility. The stage is set for the events to follow. Fact, historical dates, locations, charges. Folklore, shadows, whispers, chains that hum, both ready to converge to carry the listener into the story that cannot be fully explained, and that will not be forgotten. Night settles fully over the plantation, the heat of the day giving way to a humid chill, carrying with it the scent of cane-wet earth and smoke from distant hearths. The cabins are darkened, but a single glow pierces the shadows, the faint, steady flame of a candle in Celestine's cabin. She moves deliberately barefoot on the worn wooden floor, the grain rough against her skin, the coolness of the boards grounding her, connecting her to every soul who has walked this land. Fact journals of the plantation note that lights were seen moving at odd hours, often attributed to strange behavior, yet provide no description. Folklore, the enslaved whisper that those lights were more than candle flames, that they were vessels of power, guiding the lost, warning the fearful, bending the night to her will. Her hands trace patterns in the air, releasing crushed herbs from a small bundle, rosemary, sage, and roots whose names have long been forgotten. The scent rises sharp and earthy, mingling with the river mist that drifts through the open door. Fact, eyewitness accounts speak of pungent, unusual odors in the cabin on the nights she performed rituals. Folklore, some claim the scent carried whispers of ancestors, that the aroma itself was a medium between the living and the departed, a bridge between despair and hope. She kneels near the center of the room, arranging 4 candles in a square, their light flickering against the walls, casting shadows that twist and bend like living things. Fact, plantation overseer logs recorded lights in the cabins, moving without explanation, dismissed as tricks of the eyes. Folklore, those shadows, according to oral histories, were the spirits of the enslaved called forth to witness and protect, to bear witness to what would soon unfold. The chains hang in one corner, iron links dulled by age, yet impossibly heavy with memory. She places her hands on the cold metal, whispering words, in a language not recorded, syllables carried by air, water, and earth. Fact, no written record preserves these words. Folklore witnesses claim the chains vibrated, trembled sometimes, producing a low humming tone, as though acknowledging her presence, as though remembering the footsteps and cries of all those who had worn them. Her voice rises slowly, first a murmur, then a song, soft, undulating, bending around the room, curling through the beams, through the floorboards, seeping into the walls. Fact, contemporary observers mention strange sounds echoing from cabins. Folklore, those who heard it later recalled feeling the chains. The earth, the river itself respond, a resonance felt in the chest, in the marrow, in the subconscious of every soul present. Outside, the river reflects the moonlight, pale and ghostly. Her song seems to travel over the water, touching the distant cane fields, brushing against the cabins where the enslaved lie in restless sleep. Fact, several plantation records note a spike in escapes and disappearances in the weeks following her rituals. Folklore. It is said the iron itself called to those seeking freedom, vibrating in response to her melodies, guiding footsteps in the dark, whispering directions only the faithful could understand. The room is alive with subtle movement. Air shifts, carrying the scent of crushed herbs and burning wicks, brushing against the walls and corners. Fact, no direct observation can confirm what occurs. The clerks and overseers provide only reports of weird disturbances. Folklore. Within these disturbances, the enslaved detect intention agency power, a presence that is protective, merciful, fierce, yet unseen by those who would punish. She moves to the window, drawing back the shutter slightly. The moonlight touches her face, casting half in brilliance, half in shadow. Her eyes glint with determination, reverence, and sorrow. Fact, historians note that Celestine's demeanor was described in passing by a few witnesses, calm, yet unnerving. Folklore. The enslaved describe her eyes as mirrors reflecting ancestors' future and the chain-bound present all at once. Time stretches. The candlelight flickers, the chains hum, and the river continues its eternal motion outside. Fact, the plantation's overseers eventually left these observations undocumented, claiming fear, uncertainty, or disbelief. Folklore, oral tradition preserves it. The song continues beyond the cabin into dreams, into whispered stories, into the very soil of Georgia. Her hands hover over the chains, then press against them firmly. A pulse seems to travel through the links, through the floor, through the walls. Fact, technical explanations failed to account for vibrations felt by observers. Folklore. The enslaved recognize this as the power of memory, of intent, of resistance. The chains remember the chains, answer the chains, obey. By dawn, the ritual concludes. The candles extinguish, the herbs scattered, the song fading into the early light. Fact, plantation logs return to mundane detail. Work begins, labor continues. Folklore, the legend, survives. The melody lingers in wind, in water, in the iron itself. The imprint of a voice that refused to be silenced, echoing through generations. The plantation awakes. Sounds of labor resume. A rooster crows. The river glints in the morning sun. And yet in corners and crevices, the memory of the night remains. Fact and folklore intertwine. The official record will never fully capture it, and yet every whispered story, every tremor in the iron, every rustle in the cane, carries the resonance of that human scene. Mamá Celestine's presence lingers tangible, yet elusive, alive, in the memory of those who lived it, and in the echoes that still reach us today. The year turns. 1857. Bleeds into 1858, and the records of Gullah-Geechee parish grow thinner, more fragmented. The clerk's handwriting grows hurried, uneven, as if the very act of writing has become burdened with something he cannot define. Between shipments and ledgers, a note appears, a brief remark almost casual. The cellar remains sealed. The air is foul. The chains hum during heavy rain. No explanation follows, no acknowledgement. Just that single sentence lodged like a splinter in history. Fact reports from neighboring plantations mention inexplicable fires, tools rusting, overnight oxen refusing to enter certain fields. In May of that same year, the local church recorded a decline in attendance, fear of witchcraft in lower districts, the minister writes, and disturbances of the metal in barns. The words seem absurd to modern eyes. But at the time, fear was a kind of faith in silence, a kind of confession. Folklore tells it differently. They say the song never stopped. They say the moment Celestine's body dropped from the gallows, the earth beneath the scaffold shifted, the ground itself took her voice. They say when the river flooded weeks later, it carried that voice into the soil, into the roots, into the iron of every tool, every shackle, every chain that ever touched human flesh. The enslaved believed she had become the element itself, that her song turned to vibration, her spirit to rust, her breath to humidity in the air. For a century afterward, workers on that land swore they could feel it. Whenever storms rolled in from the coast, whenever thunder cracked across the fields, the sound would return low, mournful, resonant, like a chain dragging beneath the riverbed. Fact: in the early 1900s, the U.S. Geological Survey conducted soil and mineral tests in the region. Among the findings, an unusual presence of oxidized iron in river sediment near the former plantation site, higher than average, with a reddish hue that locals called blood rust. Scientists noted it as a geological curiosity. Locals called it her proof, her signature. In 1933, the same year, Joseph F. Allen recorded the Gullah woman's song. Another document appeared, a letter written by a former sharecropper named Isaiah Carter, addressed to the Savannah Historical Society. The letter described a spirit woman who walks by the river when storms come, touching the metal fence and making it sing. Carter's tone is matter-of-fact, even reverent. He writes, "She never harms, she reminds." The society filed it under folkloric material, unverifiable. But the tone of that phrase, unverifiable, is a quiet way of saying we felt it too. The deeper one searches, the more Celestine reappears in unlikely places. Fact: 1940s WPA interviews collected from descendants of plantation workers mention her name more than any other. One account from a woman named Eliza Green reads, "My mama said when thunder rolled, that was Celestine walking. Said when the floorboards shook, she was passing through listening." Another tells of a field hand who dropped his chains during a storm and claimed to hear them sing back in her voice. In the archives, there are gaps. Pages torn, ink-smudged entries, abruptly ending mid-sentence. One of the last coherent notes in the Gullah-Geechee parish register reads, "We've sealed it again. The cellar cannot be kept quiet." The historian in us searches for cause, vibration, pressure, expansion of metal under heat. But the voiceover within us feels the rhythm, the cadence, the faint echo that science can't quite erase. Folklore insists that Celestine's ritual was not meant for destruction, but deliverance. That her curse was not to bind, but to unbind. That she sang to free the souls trapped in metal, the memories forged into iron by centuries of suffering. They say every chain that broke in those years carried her voice as it fell. They say her song crossed the ocean wind, returning to Africa in whispers that only the river could translate. Fact: a 1978 excavation report by the Georgia Historical Preservation Society mentions the discovery of iron fragments in anomalous locations found beneath collapsed foundations where no documented storage had existed. The pieces were small, corroded, twisted, as if by heat, but no evidence of fire was present. A handwritten note in the margin of the report reads, "Some of the fragments ring when struck." The researcher left no explanation. Folklore elders say those fragments were pieces of the cursed iron remnants of the chains she sang to, that each one holds a portion of her song. They say if you strike them, they hum faintly, and if you listen long enough, you can hear her words. "The earth knows my name. The chains will remember my voice." The line between truth and legend fractures completely here. Fact bleeds into superstition, superstition into archaeology. The official story of a woman hanged in 1856 merges with the spectral memory of rust and vibration. And in that fusion, that quiet confusion, something survives. During Reconstruction, former slaves traveling north by river routes carried stories of her as a saint, a protector, a spectral guardian. They lit candles before leaving iron nails at the water's edge, a tradition passed on quietly, never written down, but preserved in gesture and repetition. Fact journals of northern churches record peculiar coastal customs among freedmen, the lighting of candles and iron offerings at baptisms. Folklore, those rituals were to call her blessing, to keep the chains silent forever. Even in modern Georgia, echoes remain. Some workers refuse to enter the cellar ruins during storms. Some claim their tools hum if left near the old site overnight. Others say the sound comes not from metal at all, but from the ground, a vibration so low it feels like a heartbeat beneath the feet. Fact, in 1997, a film crew documenting local folklore captured faint audio of metallic resonance during a thunderstorm near the ruins. They labeled it interference. The sound engineer later described it differently. It wasn't interference, it was a pattern, like someone exhaling through metal. Folklore, they say her voice lives within the storm, not as rage, but as reminder. That every time lightning strikes iron, it echoes her final note. That she doesn't haunt, she endures. And still the documents keep surfacing. Letters, testimonies, field notes, all circling the same invisible center, a woman whose death birthed a myth and whose myth refuses to die. One archivist once wrote, "We treat these materials with care, though they resist classification." Another added, "Her name returns in every decade like rust through paint." Fact and folklore are no longer opposites here. They have merged into a single field of sound, a vibration, through time. The record hums, the chain hums, the memory hums, and through it her voice, half history, half spirit, keeps singing, reminding the living of what the dead endured. Somewhere beneath the red soil of Georgia, in the echo chamber of that abandoned cellar, the air still vibrates when thunder passes. Some say it's the settling of earth. Others know better. They say it's her song, not trapped, not angry, but alive, waiting to be heard by those willing to listen. The file should have ended long ago, but the sound never did. In 1971, archivist Marianne Collins reopened a sealed box in the basement of the Savannah Historical Society, one mislabeled folkloric correspondence, 1930s. Inside were scraps, burned paper, a half-melted wax cylinder, and a folded note in cramped handwriting. On it, just 8 words, "Do not play when thunder is near." Fact laboratory analysis dated the wax to around 1933, the same year Joseph F. Allen recorded the Gullah woman's song. Folklore, they say the cylinder contained more than a voice. They say it held a vibration, a pulse too low to be human, too constant to be accident. When Collins played it, the sound began faint, a soft hum, irregular, metallic, almost like breath trapped inside a pipe. Then came a pattern, a melody beneath the static. A woman's voice, half recognizable, rising and breaking, whispering in the cadence of prayer. And then a tremor. The recording stopped mid-syllable, cutting into silence so abrupt it felt like the air itself had been pulled out of the room. She described the silence afterward as alive. Fact, her report filed 2 days later, ends abruptly. The last line trails off. The sound was not from the cylinder. The desk. Nothing follows. She left the archives 3 months later and never returned. Folklore tells a kinder version, that she began hearing the hum even in daylight. That she followed it one storming night to the banks of the Gullah-Geechee, where lightning split the river in two. They say she stood there, hands over her ears, smiling. They say she finally heard the whole song. There are people who call it a curse. Others call it a transmission, a message passed through metal, water, and time. Each generation seems to rediscover it. Each thinks they've found the origin. Each walks away changed. Fact, in 1997, a field team of historians returned to the cellar ruins. They used vibration sensors instruments, sensitive enough to register the movement of roots underground. During rainfall, the reading spiked unexpectedly. Steady rhythmic pulses matching a tempo of 84 beats per minute, identical to the recorded rhythm of the 1933 cylinder. Their conclusion likely environmental interference. But the lead researcher later wrote in his private notes, "We turned off every machine." The pulse continued. Folklore fills the silence left by their hesitation. It says the hum is not interference at all. It's the echo of every chain ever broken, singing the same slow heartbeat. It says that when you stand in that cellar, the earth doesn't just remember, it listens. And there, in that darkness, it said the air changes. You feel a weight like humidity thickening behind your eyes. The smell of iron, old and sweet, rises from the floor. Somewhere beneath your feet, vibration. Not sound. Vibration. The way a heart speaks without words. Fact, the humidity levels in the chamber exceed predictions even in winter. No source of heat, no standing water. Yet every instrument fogs, every lens, films over every microphone dies before reaching the final minute of recording. Folklore. They say it's because she won't let herself be finished. That every attempt to close her file, every recording, every report stops exactly where her voice once broke. The song itself has no lyrics, not in the way we understand words. It is rhythm, breath, the rise and fall of something ancient, older than language, older than chains. Researchers have tried to isolate patterns to translate frequencies. Some hear the cadence of heartbeat, others of footsteps or prayer. None agree. But all agree it moves them, the inexplicable sensation that someone somewhere is still singing beneath the noise. In 2003, audio technician Daniel Reyes replayed a digitized copy of the Allen cylinder. He slowed the speed, layered the frequencies, and claimed to hear a phrase hidden in the lower register. Not words, but a sequence that felt like one. He wrote, "The earth knows my name. The chains remember my voice." He deleted the file a week later. He said it wasn't supposed to answer back. Fact, nothing supernatural was confirmed. The noise remains unexplained acoustic interference. The archives list the phenomenon as historical folklore. But for those who've stood in the ruins, historians, wanderers, locals, all say the same thing. When thunder rolls, the ground vibrates just enough to make your bones ache, and the metal still hanging from the walls hums like something breathing. This is the bridge between history and haunting, where every record, every echo, every superstition becomes the same melody. Where Celestine is no longer a woman in the past, but a frequency in the present. Where memory itself becomes her body, the air her breath, the rust her voice. Folklore says she never left. Fact cannot prove she's gone. And somewhere between the two, when lightning strikes and the wind howls through the cypress trees, when the rain hits the old stones in a rhythm almost human, you can still hear her. Not as scream, not as warning, but as promise. The sound begins low. The chains shiver. The walls vibrate. And then the hum rises, deep, warm, steady. The same hum that filled the cellar the night she sang. It moves through the ground, through the river, through the iron veins of the earth, until even silence begins to echo. Fact ends here. Folklore continues. The last sound on the cylinder is not voice or hum, it's a single heartbeat. Loud, hollow, final, then nothing. Nothing except the certainty that something once alive is still listening. The cellar is gone now. Or at least that's what the official map says. The last excavation in 2012 found nothing but soil, brick dust, and fragments of corroded iron too thin to identify. The walls have collapsed into themselves. The coordinates were marked photographed, archived. A fence was put up, a sign installed, private property, no trespassing. But the locals say the fence never stays standing long. Every few months after heavy rain, it leans slightly, always in the same direction, as if the ground beneath it shifts in slow memory. Fact, a preservation order now protects the site. Folklore, no one lives within half a mile of it. Not anymore. At the Savannah Historical Society, a box sits in the restricted collection. The label reads simply, Gullah-Geechee Recordings. Inside, one preserved photograph of the cellar before it collapsed, the 1933 wax cylinder, and the partial transcript of Marianne Collins' unfinished report. Fact, the box has not been opened since 2016. Folklore, the archivists say, it hums on humid days. In the nearby town of Statesboro, an old Gullah-Geechee choir still sings a song passed down through generations, a melody without clear words. Just a rise and fall, a breath, a hum. The elders call it the Song of the Iron. They don't claim to know where it came from. But when asked, one of the elders, a woman with clouded eyes and hands rough from age, smiled and said that one came from the woman who freed the metal. Fact, the song's scale matches the same pentatonic pattern as the Allen recording. Folklore. It's the same song still sung, still alive. The legend of Mamá Celestine has shifted with the years. Some tell it as a ghost story, the Hoodoo priestess who cursed the chains that bound her. Others tell it as a story of resistance, the woman who used the only power left to her voice rhythm memory. Historians debate her existence. Churches call her a myth. Poets call her a mother. But for those who walk the Gullah-Geechee at dusk when the fog hangs low and the water gleams red with iron, the air tells it differently. It tells it in vibration low, constant, human. Fact, the name Celestine appears nowhere else in the Georgia death registries of 1856. Folklore, because she was never truly recorded and never truly erased. Every few years, a new researcher returns to the site searching for data evidence, a reason to explain the hum. Some bring instruments, others bring microphones. None bring answers. Fact, the readings remain inconclusive. Folklore, they say you can't measure a song that's still being sung. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the story was never meant to end in a file or a report, but to keep breathing through the generations, shifting shape with each retelling, whispering in each storm. Because her story is not only hers. It belongs to every soul who ever sang under the weight of chains. Every hand that bled against iron. Every heartbeat that kept rhythm with hope. It belongs to the people who turned pain into prayer and silence into survival. The spell never broke, not because it failed, but because it was never meant to. It became a bridge between history and memory, between the dead and the living, between what's written and what's felt. Somewhere in a drawer of rusted iron keys found during the last excavation, one key was different, longer, thinner, bent in the middle as if softened by heat. When struck, it rang, just once. Fact, the metallurgical report called it a resonance anomaly. Folklore, they called it her answer. In the end, the story of Celestine is not about curses or miracles or haunting. It's about endurance, the human ability to make music out of suffering, to turn imprisonment into invocation, to sing into iron until the iron sings back. And maybe that's why, on quiet nights when the thunder fades and the world stills, the hum returns, soft, steady, unbroken. It rises from the earth like breath, moves through the air like prayer, fades into silence. That isn't silence at all, only the long echo of something refusing to die. You can call it myth. You can call it science. You can call it history. But the truth hums the same, a vibration that outlives its origin. Because somewhere in Georgia, the earth still knows her name. And the chains, they still remember her voice. You've just heard a record from a circle that never closed. A file that still hums beneath the soil. Before you go, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, what moment you felt the chill, and whether you think songs can outlive the people who sing them. Because some stories don't end. They just keep echoing.